Hello everybody, hope y'all are doing well. In this video, I'm just going to be making a quick tier list of languages I've been using recently, just for fun, and yeah, there's nothing really special about it. You can feel free to disagree with my opinions, but let's jump right in. First of all, we have C. Now, C is a pretty special language because it was the first language I took in a college setting, and I'm going to be putting it in S tier, which may sound strange, but I really enjoyed the language's syntax. It's very simple syntax. You as a programmer are forced to come up with a lot of the solutions yourself rather than importing packages and working off of that, right? It inspired a lot of these newer languages, and also it forces you to do a lot of memory management by yourself. So it's a great language to start learning programming because you really start understanding the fundamentals of how a computer processes stuff, handles information, runs algorithms, right? I think it's just an awesome language for learning that type of stuff. And if we take a look at some of my, what is this? Some of my assignments, right? Let's take a look at like hand dot, hand.c, there we go, right? It's a very simple language and syntax that inspired a lot of the newer languages today, and I think stuff like pointers, learning about these types of things is very crucial. You're going to make a lot of algorithms yourself, and it's a blast to learn with. Now, heading over to our tier list, right, we have C, C++, C Sharp, and these languages sound similar, and C and C++ are quite similar, but I'm going to be putting C++ in A tier. And this is because I feel like C by itself, right, I wouldn't be building any huge projects with C. And C++ does let you build a lot of cool stuff because it starts having classes, you can organize your code in all of these ways, but because we're trying to introduce classes onto a language that already existed, I wouldn't put C++ in like the same category as like Rust or some other object-oriented languages, right? Solely because it's a language that tried to put object-oriented stuff into an already pretty good language. So I just don't think it fits right in like the S tier of like an ideal language, right? But I also like the syntax of C++ since it's inspired by C. It did kick off a lot of the object-oriented stuff, and yeah, we learn a lot of data structures and algorithms because you can make classes with C++. Now, I'm also going to be putting C Sharp in A tier, and I didn't really like C Sharp at first, but at my first internship, we used C Sharp to build our web server. And it showed me that when you have a language that's really designed well and has a huge ecosystem around it that's supported because like Microsoft makes a lot of these like tooling and stuff available, it's really easy to just make stuff work, right? Because the language was built for this. Uh, so I think it was just really simple to build stuff like a web server in C Sharp. And although I don't really like the syntax and how the language handles stuff, such as the naming conventions with the capital letters and all of that, I enjoyed working with the language, which is why I put it in A tier. Now, moving on, we got Python. Python was actually the first language I started playing with, right, when I was in like middle school because I heard it was an easy language, it was easy to learn. However, the language itself, right, it used to be like very good, well, it still is very good for stuff like AI and data processing, but at least for me, I'm not really into this space of, AI machine learning, that type of thing, and building stuff with the language doesn't really seem fun to me because it's a lot of like just basic stuff, which is weird because I put C in S tier and I like C syntax, but it just feels like you're using libraries and just instead of you being the programmer and you building this solution yourself, it feels more of you just using a library and knowing what to do with it, right? But I still respect the language for its huge advancements in just data and numbers, right? So I'm going to throw it in B tier. Now Lua. I think it has a lot of similarities to Python, but I'm actually going to be putting Lua in A tier. And this might be very biased because I use NeoVim, but it's just a great language. Like, it's a very simple language. And you'll notice, like, a lot of the languages I like are simple because you don't have to, with just a little bit of knowledge, you can make a lot of cool stuff with Lua, and it's really easy to embed into other systems. With Vim, for something like the LSP, right? Like, to make this with something like Python or JavaScript would be a lot harder than just Lua, which is all tables, and you can do a lot of cool stuff for very little, right? And I'm tempted to put it in like B tier because of the one-based indexing, which is understandable because of their table system. But I think Lua is still a great language to do configuration with, and I might even put it. Hold on, wait. I should probably be sorting these within its own tiers. So I think I would put C++ under C#, and I would probably put Lua in the middle right there. So I think that's a pretty good ranking for my preferences. And yeah, Lua is just a sweet language to work with. It's very simple. You can do a lot of cool stuff with it. Now, moving on to Java. I had to learn Java because A, robotics, we used it to code our robot, and B, because of AP Computer Science, which forced me to learn Java. But the language itself, it just feels very heavy. I don't know how to describe it, but it has a lot of object-oriented stuff, and so similar to C++, but I just don't really like the object-oriented nature of things. I think languages like Go and Rust handle that very well, of not being object-oriented, but still supporting some of its features, right? The language itself, it just feels like a lot of mental gymnastics to have to work with a huge language, and I think it does have a lot of use in like older applications, but I wouldn't be building anything with Java these days. And moving on to JavaScript, right? JavaScript was one of the first languages I built like huge projects with, like Discord bots and websites. But I would be putting JavaScript in D tier mostly because there's what I believe to be a better alternative here, but also because like the type system, some of the crazy stuff that happens with string processing, like how you can, if you sort a list, right? If I go into like node, right, and I do something like -1 1 -1 1 -2 7 dot sort, right? Like what is this, right? It sorts -1 then -2 because it's trying to do string conversions and all of that, but I think it's just a stranger language that it does fare very well in terms of building cool projects and has a great starter language. But in my opinion, I think TypeScript is a better choice for this, and I'm going to put it in B2, probably above Python. I can get Python over here, right? Because I think what JavaScript lacked the most was a type system, and I really like type languages because it just makes the experience a lot better, right? The coding experience, which can do stuff like autocomplete and just documentation. So I prefer type languages over these dynamic languages. So I would be putting TypeScript right here. Now, I maybe like a year ago, I would have had TypeScript in A tier, possibly even S tier, because it's just honestly a great language for like general purpose web development, right? Anything you build on the front end, like probably 95% of stuff is made with some variation of TypeScript, JavaScript with like a front-end framework. So I like TypeScript for the front-end stuff. You can also have great interoperability with the backend because all of your types are shared, but it just doesn't seem that interesting of a language anymore, so that's why I lowered it down to B2. Now, Gleam, right? I played around with this during the summer because it seemed like a really interesting language. And I would be putting Gleam in A tier, at the lower end of A tier, because it's an interesting language with like functional programming, and I really enjoy functional programming. The problem is it seems to push it a lot, and some things just aren't there yet, right, in the ecosystem, primarily because it's a new language, and possibly because of influences from like the Erlang or Beam ecosystem. but stuff like character handling, right? Because I made what is this? CD, what's it called again? AOC. Right, I did some of the AOC stuff, Advent of Code stuff in Gleam, and it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed the sort of functional programming that went along with Gleam, and I love this arrow syntax or the piping syntax where you can just pipe an argument through this entire array of functions, and I think that's great. But when I got to a point where I had to deal with characters in Advent code, that's where it started getting interesting because it doesn't really handle that well, or maybe I'm just a bad programmer, probably the latter. But I think it's just a really cool language. Another thing is it doesn't have stuff like structs or great support of stuff like structs or objects. So it's a lot harder to build huge applications with Gleam, but it's still a very interesting language. Now, our final two, I'm going to be putting both of them in S tier, Golang and Rust. Why? Well, Golang, I'm putting Rust probably at the front and Golang second. Okay, that sounds like a good tier list, right? I enjoy Golang first because I initially kind of disliked the language because it seemed like an uninteresting language to use, right? But back then I used to build a lot of web servers with Rust, and when I started using Golang, I could just build stuff like 20 times faster because I didn't have to worry about the borrow checker, right? It was a language made for a purpose, and it fulfills that purpose to like perfection, right? With all of the structs, with all of the APIs, the standard library is so amazing in Golang, right? Which is sort of what Gleam was missing, like in its standard library. The standard library and the tooling, which is something that Gleam also had, is very good tooling. But Golang, the LSP is amazing. It's probably the best LSP I've seen, and the whole developer experience of being able to do stuff really quickly and really fast, and it just makes sense, right? Anyone can pick up Golang in like an afternoon or a weekend and make really cool web servers with Golang. So I think it's just a language that really thrives in the field. So I will probably be using Golang for a lot of the servers I'll be using from now on. And finally, we have Rust, which I'm putting at the very top of this tier list. Now, I love Rust not because I can build stuff fast with it, because again, the borrow checker, Golang is more suited to that purpose. But Rust as a language is just very interesting to me because, at least for me, I get to focus more on the problem-solving aspect of building an application with Rust rather than the implementation. And it sounds strange because Rust and Golang are like two sides of a coin, right? You have Golang, which is super fast. You can build stuff really fast. It's like you think very little and you just do. Whereas Rust is you think a lot and you do at the very end. Because, for instance, right, I made this compiler over the summer, which is a really fun project because what Rust thrives with, like Golang is really good with web servers. Rust is really good with stuff that has to do with like algorithms, string processing. Its string functions are amazing, and functional stuff, right? And I think this is what sets Gleam back. Gleam really pushed the functional argument, right? It really wanted this functional, and everything is functional Gleam. Rust has functional, right? It's very strongly functional, but you can also do sort of the procedural side of things with like C, right? You can do that type of stuff in Rust, so it's flexible, in where you can have the both. You can have the both. Or is it the best of both worlds? That's right. So I think this compiler assignment was a lot of fun, right? Stuff like the operations, or let me see, compiler, right? All of this error handling. The error handling is absolutely amazing with the matching and the typed structs or union types. I forgot what it's called. I wrote a blog post on this, but the matching, the error handling, all of the functional stuff that goes into it, immutability by default. We have stuff like just being able to loop through things like this. Oh yeah, and all of the struct things. We have, instead of doing object-oriented stuff, which I hate, with all of the inheritance and mental gymnastics that comes with inheritance with like something like Java, right? I really enjoy Rust's system of using a struct and then implementing traits onto that struct, because then you don't have to deal with all of these. You don't have to deal with all of this inheritance, and instead you can define what goes inside of a struct. And I think that's just an amazing way to handle stuff. So in a way, Rust is like the peak of you structure out your project first and then you actually implement it. And there's a lot of fun that comes with that, with how you design your project. And it's very hard to refactor, right? Which is one of its downsides, but it's also a lot of fun to make things with, because me personally, I like the problem solving side of things. Did math team with a lot when I was little, and that's what really drew me into programming. So this sort of problem solving aspect of Rust is what really got me to enjoy the language. And so yeah, that's my entire tier list. I hope I didn't uh, make any of you unsubscribe from my channel because of this, maybe with some of the more controversial opinions here, but I do believe this is a good representation of what I like in programming and languages in general. So yeah, if you have anything to say, please leave them down in the comments below, but if not, I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.